In this video, I provide a brief overview of some of what I consider to be the historical underpinnings of student affairs. For some additional resources and supplemental readings that accompany this video, please open the lecture notes in Week 1. As mentioned in the video on the broader historical context of American higher education, faculty were concerned more with monitoring students than with teaching. But their duties extended beyond proctoring in classrooms that looked more like courtrooms than modern-day classrooms. The picture in the upper right-hand position shows one of these classrooms. You see an elevated area that looks like a judge's bench in a courtroom. Well, it's from this position that the proctor would preside over student recitation. Until the emergence of administrators dedicated to what we now know as student affairs, faculty were responsible with the totality of students' experience on campus. This was a daunting task, as college students were known for their rowdy behavior. The bottom picture shows the wall that was built around South Carolina College. Something that's interesting about this wall is that it was not built to protect the students from bad elements outside of the surrounding city, as many people might think when they see a wall around a college campus. But instead, the wall was built to protect the town people from the students. Many people credit the emergence of student affairs with the appointment of the first dean of men, LeBaron Russell Briggs, at Harvard University right around 1890. As the faculty role was quickly changing, and there was an ever-increasing desire to shift faculty work away from the day-to-day management of students, it was recognized that there was a need for an administrator dedicated to these tasks. In 1890, LeBaron Russell Briggs was named the dean of men at Harvard, and he is recognized as the first person to hold such a position. While certainly the predecessor to modern-day student affairs staff and current deans of students, Dr. Briggs was not focused on enhancing student learning and development. He and the hundreds of other deans of men who quickly followed were concerned with maintaining order. It would be some time before student affairs as we know it today, with its focus on holistic learning and development, began to really emerge. What is now the National Association of Student Personnel Administrators, or NASPA, began in 1919 under the name of National Association of Deans and Advisors of Men. It is not a coincidence that Alice Freeman Palmer was named the first Dean of Women in 1892. It is right around 1890 that institutions that had previously been limited to male enrollment began enrolling women, although in very small numbers. Enrolling women actually presented a number of challenges. First, any on-campus residences were inhabited by male students and featured common bathrooms shared by all the residents of a floor or hall. This actually gave rise to a cottage industry of boarding houses in college towns. Remember the reason for the walls around the college campuses in the early part of the 19th century? Well, student behavior hadn't improved that much by the 1890s, so there were certainly concerns about the well-being of women enrolling in what had been male-only spaces. The first deans of women performed a role that was different from deans of men, and much more akin to what we know today as student affairs. Formal training in student affairs began with the first graduate degree program in student personnel services at Columbia University's Teachers College. The first master's degree was awarded in 1917 and the first doctoral degree in 1929. To date, there are graduate programs in higher education and student affairs at roughly 200 institutions in the United States and a handful in Canada. The initial programs were focused on admissions officers and academic advisors. What is now the American College Personnel Association, or ACPA, began in 1924 as the National Association of Appointment Secretaries, which were the earliest admissions officers. We'll be covering the student personnel point of view next week, so I'll just briefly address it here. Its role in the development of the student affairs field is significant. This document, in both its 1937 and 1949 iterations, serve as key foundations for establishing a coherent profession and what would become the profession's attention to educational and developmental needs of the whole student. The second half of the 20th century brought a lot of changes to American higher education that had profound and direct impacts on student affairs. With the passage of the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, generally referred to as the GI Bill, thousands of veterans returning from World War II began enrolling in colleges and universities across the country. This meant a need for increased student housing, which brought about increases in co-curricular options to try to meet the demands of a larger student population. The Civil Rights era ushered in tremendous changes in terms of access and diversity. Student affairs professionals were looked to for ideas to help address the needs of a student body that was changing very rapidly. In addition to the civil rights movement, the 1960s heralded significant changes in student affairs. From the beginning of higher education in America, parents sent their children to college with the expectation that the faculty and staff would serve in place of the parents, or in loco parentis in Latin. As you might imagine, men and women who enrolled in college after serving in the military during a war weren't too keen on being treated as children. Also, societal changes of the 1950s and 1960s led students to assert their rights as adults, bringing an end to in loco parentis, and in the late 1960s and early 1970s, that's what happened. In loco parentis basically disappeared. However, don't think that institutions simply let go of in loco parentis in response to seeing changes in the surrounding society. Student activism was one of the key driving forces, along with some key court cases, which we'll touch on next week, and you'll explore in greater detail in the legal issues course. Founded in 1979, the Council for the Advancement of Standards in Higher Education, or CAS, is the preeminent force for promoting standards in student affairs, student services, and student development programs. CAS continues to create and deliver a dynamic and credible book of professional standards and guidelines and self-assessment guides that are designed to lead to a host of quality-controlled programs and services. The ultimate purpose of CAS is to foster and enhance student learning, development, and achievement, and to promote good citizenship. CAS standards respond to real-time student needs, the requirements of sound pedagogy, and the effective management of more than 30 functional areas, consistent with institutional missions. What CAS provides is self-monitoring of adherence to professional standards, a set of agreed-upon benchmarks. CAS standards give student affairs units a common measuring stick, but also a set of goals to strive toward reaching. We'll be discussing CAS standards in more detail in week 7.